In this video, I'm going to take you from no Blender knowledge to showing you how to bring in your character, animate it, and playblast your shots, and I'm going to give you a free rig to do this with. If you're new here, my name is Brian. I'm a professional 3D animator. I started out in Maya and I've since transitioned to Blender as my software of choice for animating. I worked on the Maya and the 3 Netflix series, which I believe to date is the largest production done in Blender. So that's where it all started. That's where this knowledge comes from. With that out of the way, go download Blender and let's get started. So the first thing we have to cover is navigation. So when you open up your Blender, you'll probably have something that looks like this. Now I'm gonna go ahead and hide my picture so you can see this screencast right here for whatever I click. And to start off, we want to rotate around our object. I'm doing this by holding the middle mouse. You can also use this gizmo up here, this circle. You can just click and drag and you can achieve the same thing. It's just like holding middle mouse. Except with this gizmo, you also have the option to click on X, for example, and you snap to that view. Or you can, if you want to view the object from above, you click Z and you snap to top view. And then when you hold middle mouse, you can just come right out of it. Now to actually pan around in your scene, if you're used to Maya, instead of Alt, you'll be holding Shift. So Shift and middle mouse, you can pan around. Just middle mouse, you can rotate around. To zoom in, it's just like Maya. You just use your scroll wheel to scroll in and scroll out. You also have the additional option to hold Control and use your middle mouse to slide in and slide out. So scroll in, scroll out, slide in by holding Control and clicking your middle mouse and sliding out. Now that's just for very basic navigations. It's pretty close to Maya, so it shouldn't be too big of an issue. The biggest difference being that you have to hold Shift middle mouse instead of Alt middle mouse to pan around. Now let's talk about the workspace and let's try and set up our workspace a little bit. You can see up here that we have different tabs for different workspaces. We have modeling, sculpting, UV editing, texture painting, but we're going to be going to animation since that's what we want to do. Now, because we went to texture painting, you see over here that we have a brush and this says texture paint. So I'm just going to go ahead and change this to object mode, which is what it should be in. And here in the animation tab, we have our, and let me turn my webcam back on. So here in the animation tab, we have our perspective, we have the outliner, which I can just click and drag and make it a little bit bigger. We have our properties tab right here. This is the dope sheet, but we will be turning this into the graph editor, don't worry. And over here, we have our camera view. So again, this should be fairly close to how you would work in Maya, where you have your camera view, your perspective, outliner on the side, and what will be our graph editor in a second. The biggest thing being the properties tab right here, which we won't be touching too much in this video, but I'll talk a little bit about that later. Now for the camera view, you can, again, middle mouse and drag and come out of it. But if you want to go back to camera view, you just press the 0 on your numpad, and it will snap the view to camera. You can do that to your perspective too. I can go to my perspective and just press 0 on the numpad and it'll turn into my camera. Or I can just middle mouse, drag and come out of it. And there's the camera right there. You can of course move and drag your different panels to change the sizing by just clicking on the line and dragging, or you can go to where the corners are and either drag right to joint or drag left to joint to the left, or you can right click and create a vertical split or a horizontal split. So let's create a vertical split and I'll show you what that looks like. Let's say I want the window to be this big, and then I can go ahead and change this into anything. So you can create panels, joint panels, and you just have a lot more customization than you may be used to with Maya. Now let's talk shop. Let's bring out our timeline. So I'm gonna go ahead and click drag this all the way up, and there we just revealed our timeline. And all the stuff we're doing, once we set up our workspace, we can save the workspace so you never have to do this again. You just want a workspace where you're comfortable with. So we have our timeline now by dragging it up, and this works fairly similar to Maya. So you can just click and drag your playhead, but in Blender, you can press space to play the animation, press space to pause the animation. And for example, if you have multiple keys, so I'm gonna go ahead and set a key here and set a key here, and then set one more key in the middle right here. So in the timeline, you can actually use the arrow keys. So I'm using right arrow to go frame by frame, left arrow to go back, or you can use the up and down to snap to the next key. So I'm pressing up here, I'm going to the next key set in my timeline, press the back or the down arrow to go back one key, or left and right to go frame by frame. Another thing you want to do with the timeline is to click on this circle right here. That is your auto key. So I'm just turning on auto key, make sure that's blue and filled in. Now every time let's say I move my object, it'll set a new key for me automatically. Again, just like Maya. Next thing we're going to do with the timeline is set a keying option. This is telling Blender what sort of key you want to set. So if you have a character, you want the location, rotation, scale, and any sort of custom properties that the controller has. You want all that to be keyed, right? You don't want just the location keyed or just the scale keyed. You want everything to be keyed. So what we can do is in the timeline is go to keying. Here where it says keying set, I'm going to click location, rotation, scale, and custom properties. So now every time I press I to set a key, it sets a key on everything I would need as an animator. Lastly, with the timeline, we can just set the range, which again, you can find down here, very similar to Maya. So I'm going to go ahead and change the range from 1 to, let's say, 50. There we go. So here's our range, and to zoom in on it, I can just drag select all my keys in the timeline. And with my cursor in the timeline, because it's important where your cursor is. So with my cursor in the timeline, I'm going to press the numpad period key. Numpad period is like, I believe, F in Maya for focus. So the numpad period key is to focus. It works the same way in visually as well. So in the viewport, I can press the numpad period key and I zoom in on the selected object. And it also works in the outline as well. If you have a long list of stuff, you can select the object in the viewport and then press the numpad key on the outline to then focus to it and find it in the outline as well. Now it's time for the graph editor. Now bringing this out and changing the dope sheet to a graph editor will really make this scene more familiar to you if you're used to using Maya. So let's go ahead and drag up this dope sheet a little bit, and to the left of where it says dope sheet over here on this button, I'm going to click that and I'm going to change this to the graph, and right away we have our graph editor. I'm going to zoom out of my viewport with the scroll here, and you can see when we open up the object that we have keyed, we have the location, rotation, and scale here keyed all throughout. And now let's optimize our graph editor for character animation. Right away what you can do is turn on normalize, and this is again very similar to Maya. What it does is that in the graph editor, it shows all your keys and all your graphs between -1 and 1. So you'll never have to scroll super high up and scroll super low to try and find a curve. If a value of 1 is 10 and a value of another one is 200, for example, by having normalize on, they all fit between -1 and 1. So make sure that's on. Next up, what we're going to do is, this is going to be in the settings. So when you want, for example, let's move our object here. So let's say here, I want the object to actually be higher, just so we have something to work with in our graph. Let's say here, I want it to be lower, and I'm going to press A to select everything in my graph editor. And then I'm going to press the numpad period key to zoom in on it. And so now we have some shape to work with. But for example, if I want to select just the location Y here and I drag select, it selects everything. It doesn't select what I highlight in the channel box here. So when I drag select, I just want that to be selected. It doesn't do a good job of that, but we can change that. So let's go to edit, preferences, animation, and down here, let's drag this out so you can read it. It says only show selected F-curve keyframes. We're gonna make sure this is on, because this tells Blender that we only wanna select the curves that we've highlighted. So I'm gonna go ahead and save my preferences so I never have to do this again. It's a one-time thing to set up your workspace. And now when I press the X location and I drag select, only the X location gets selected. Now, if you want to scale your view from one particular area, let's say I want to scale my view from this key in the graph editor. What I can do is select that key and then hold Control and middle mouse, and I can go up and down if you want it to be more accurate. So let's actually focus on it. So I'm going to go ahead and focus, and now I can scale and in either direction skew my view with that being in the center of my attention. If it's multiple keys, it'll work better. So let's select these two, focus on it. And now we can skew from the center of our view by just holding middle mouse and Control. Now, as animators, we often animate to audio. So let's talk about how you can add audio to your scene. You know what? Let me hide my camera here. You can actually go to a corner here and and let me right click and then horizontal split. So I'm gonna create a new window, make it a little bit bigger. We can make our graph editor bigger here as well. And what I'm gonna do is actually change this new window to video sequencer. Once I do that, I can then go to add and go to sound, locate my audio, and this is a clip from one of the custom dialogues we give to our animation students so they can animate to. Gonna go ahead and add the sound, and let's see if we can focus on it. Drag this up a little bit higher. You can see the waveforms in there, but what I'm gonna do is actually click on, there's a little bar here. I'm gonna click on one of those little circles and drag it down to kind of scale in. I can use middle mouse and control as well here. Middle mouse and control to scale it. And now we have our audio form, and I'm using scroll to kind of just scroll in. So now when we press play, there you go. But you can see that the first few frames doesn't actually have audio. So we can actually just click and drag this all the way to frame 1 or frame 0. Let's say frame 1. And then go to frame 1, press play. And because our timeline ends at 50, so does the audio. So we can go ahead and extend this to, let's say, 350. And let's see when we press play.
What's the holdup? What's wrong with her?
Well, sis.
There you go. So I'm gonna go ahead and change this back to 50. And this is how you can see your audio waves as you're animating. Now, if you run into an issue where you can't actually hear the audio when you press play, then here's what you can do. Let me hide my camera again. You can go to playback, make sure play audio is selected. And if you can't hear the audio when you're scrubbing either, like so, you can actually, again, in playback, check on scrubbing. And now when you play, you hear it. And when you scrub on the timeline, you can hear the audio perfectly. If you're still having issues, then maybe you can change, again in playback, change play every frame to sync to audio. And this should solve most of your audio problems. So now both when we play and when we scrub, it's all connected, you can hear it scrubbing, and you can animate your dialogue. So let's say that this is our perfect workspace. We don't want any changes, and every time we open up Blender, this is what we want. We want the audio right here. We want our timeline here, our graph editor, and our different views, our camera view and our perspective right here. You know what? It's not a perfect setup with this cube, so I'm gonna go ahead and just absolutely destroy that cube out of there. We don't need it. You wanna also make sure that there's no extra lights or extra cameras that you don't need either. So I'm gonna go ahead and delete the light and just leave the camera in there. So every time I open Blender, there's only a camera in there and nothing else. So I can just bring in my character and I'm good to go. Now you also wanna get rid of this audio clip right here. So I'm gonna click on it and press delete because you don't want that audio coming in every time. And to save this, you can go to File, Defaults, and Save Startup File. And that's it. You press confirm it. And now every time you open Blender, your startup file shows up. And as you work with Blender and you figure out new things in your setup, you can just make those changes. Let's say I want different sizing, and I decide I want the timeline smaller and I don't want the audio, whatever changes, even changes to the properties here. You make those changes, and then again, you go to File, Default, Save Startup File, and that's it. You have a new workspace and you'll develop it over time, but I just wanted to show you how you can save it so you never have to do it again. Now, you're not a character animator if you don't know how to actually bring in a character and animate it. So in this section, I'm gonna show you how to append and link a character into Blender. This is the same as referencing and importing a character in Maya. And the character we're gonna be using is our animate bot rig. This is gonna be completely free. I'm giving this to you as a gift. And we even have a video on how to animate your first walk cycle in Blender using this rig. So after this video, you can go watch that and get started with your very first animation. So I'll have the link in the description for you, but how you actually append or link a character in is like so. You go to File, and append is import, and link is like referencing. So first, I'm going to show you how to link your character in, and then I'll do append just so you know as well. So let's go to link, find your character, double click on it, and then we're gonna go to collections and click on to animate robot. These are just the different collections in that Blender file, but we want just the to animate robot. So we're gonna press link, and now you can't really select the character. So what you have to do is go to object, go to library override, and make. Now I can't select my character, so I'm gonna go ahead and bring out this little window. You can also bring it in and out with T. And I'm gonna change this to box select. And this is what I use for animation too. I use box select so you can drag select controllers. But right now you can see we can't actually click the controllers because it's all just one. Well, that's because you're in object mode, and in Blender there's for animators, there's only really two modes you have to worry about: object mode and pose mode. Object mode is for bringing stuff in or moving boxes, moving cameras. But when you want to work with armatures or rigs, like a character, you have to select the armature and then change object mode to pose mode. And now all those individual controllers become available to you. There's a very super fast way to go between these. When you're going to move, let's say I want to move my camera here, for example, I can't select it in pose mode, but instead of every time having to go up here and change it to object mode, move this, you can press Control Tab. So I'm in pose mode right now, and I can press Control Tab in object mode, move this, Control Tab, or select this, Control Tab in pose mode. So super quick hotkey, just Control Tab. You'll notice Blender's full of hotkeys, but once you get a few of them going, it's so good. You'll animate, I promise you, once you get the hang of it, you'll animate faster than you animate vanilla Maya, at least without Animbot. So just get those hotkeys going, and Control Tab saves you a lot of time when you're going between multiple characters. Now this is linking or referencing, but appending or importing is actually one step less. So I'm gonna go ahead and right click, delete hierarchy. And what I want to do now is append that same character. So again, append, we're in collections, and I'm selecting to animate robot, and we're already there. There's nothing else we need to do. We just have to go into pose mode, and all the controllers are there. And you can see we can move everything by just appending and then go into pose mode. No additional steps, no hassle. But this way your file is obviously larger and it might get slower as you add more stuff to it, just like Maya. So right now our character doesn't have a texture. Let's go ahead and open this up and make sure color from material is actually switched to texture. Once we do that, we can see that our character have a texture. And over here too, we can actually change this to a viewport shading. So that should automatically give it some light and have the textures showing in this view as well, in the camera view. We don't need it. It slows, especially when you're animating, it slows down Blender. You don't want to be in shading. You want to be in solid, but just for the sake of this video. So now to actually move our character, there is a couple of options. One way you can actually move stuff is by pressing a controller and pressing G. I'm just moving it freely with one hand with just my mouse. And you can left click to confirm that position and it will set a key, or you can right click and it cancels whatever you're doing. So this time I'm gonna press left click. I'm gonna move it up here. Press left click, and now you can see a key appeared on frame 3 and a key is set. Now, if you want to move on a particular axis with, let's say we only want the leg to be moving forward and backwards, you can press G again to move, but then just Y, and now it's locked on the Y axis. It can only go back and forth. Or you can press GX and it will go only along the X axis. Or you can even change your view to, let's say, this view, and when you press G, it only moves in accordance to that view. So when you go to the front, you can see it didn't go left or right, it just went up and like moved in this direction. That's one way to move. Outside of G, you also have R for rotate. So it rotates based on your perspective. So if I'm press R from this way, it rotates from my perspective. There's also S for scale. And that's one quick and easy way to move things or make adjustments. Now, what you're probably more used to and how I animate mainly is this controller you see here, where it has your scale, it has your moves. You can even click the center and move from any direction. And it has your rotation. You can do all that and more by just clicking this button right here, transform. And what you can actually do, and what I've done, is you can right click on it and add a shortcut. So you can change shortcut or add a shortcut, and I've set it to my W. So you can do that, set it as your W. Now every time I select something and I press W, this gizmo shows up. So let's say I'm on box select, I have a controller selected, I press W, this shows up, this gizmo shows up, and I have all those controllers available to me. Now, if for some reason you don't see it, maybe your show gizmo button is turned off. So just make sure that's turned on by clicking it, and it should show up. The attribute editor. So there was a video I reacted to where the Maya animator that was trying Blender couldn't find the attribute editor, and they were going out of their way into the properties trying to find these attributes right here. But really, all you have to do is, again, just like how you have to press T or click this arrow right here to bring up these set of tools, it's actually right here. Just like Maya, you can hide it and unhide it. You just go to item, and the hotkey for this is N. So you just press N, it pops it up for you right there. Item is your channel box. We have your location, rotation, scale, and if there's any sort of custom properties, like for example, here we have subdivisions and no res switching, or on the head, we have head follow and light brightness. Those are custom properties. It all shows up right there in the attribute editor. All you have to do is just press N. This, like everything else, is cursor sensitive, so you want to make sure your cursor is actually in the viewport, because if you press N in the graph editor, a whole other sets of options show up for the graph editor. So make sure your viewport's here, or if it's on the camera view, you press N, it shows up on the camera view. So for almost everything, you want to make sure your cursor is in the right panel before you press that hotkey. Hope you're enjoying the video so far. I just wanted to let you know that me and a team of professional animators has spent over a year developing a laser-focused course with over 40 quality lessons teaching how to proficiently use Blender's animation tools. So even though this video is great and will get you started, our structured course will take you the next 10 steps. I'll leave a link in the description for you. Now let's get back into the video. I'm in a better spot to show you now. So you pressed a numpad period key to focus. And let's say I want to focus on this controller in the outliner. Bring your cursor to the outliner, press numpad period, and there we go. We found the hip controller right there. So it's the focus button for everything. Another super helpful key to know is A. A, just like Control A in any program, it selects everything. So just A in my viewport selects all my controllers. So I can go to frame 1 and press I, and now I have keys on everything. I can just select the head here, and let's open this up. You know what, let's go ahead and go to frame 3 and move some stuff just so we can give an example. So again, I can drag and select this. Oops, that's the hip. Drag, select that down, bring the foot down. I can press G and bring the head forward, because why not? Press A to select everything, press I to set a key, and you can come over here in, let's say, the rotation here. Press A to select all my keys, numpad period key to zoom in on it. Again, it's just like F, and there you go. I can even select my keys in my timeline and press numpad period, and it'll focus on it. But pressing A helps you select everything. So if I press A here, all the keys in this panel. If I press A in the channels, all the channels get selected. A on my viewport, all the controls get selected. And now that we have everything selected, what you can do is let's go between these two keys. So we have this amazing animation right here. And let me just actually drag select this so that it's 10 frames. So here's a slow animation. And let's say we want to ease out of this pose. We don't want just this computer generated in between. We can go to frame 5, and instead of it being in the middle, we can press Shift E, and you have access to an in-betweener. So on the top, you can see there's a percentage showing. So it's the percentage between the first key and the second key. So here, let's say we want to be 90% or only 10% of the key to the right. So you're easing out of it. Let's say 14%. So now you're easing out. You're holding this pose for a lot longer, and then boom. So you have access to a built-in in-betweener. All right, now let's tackle some helpful animation stuff that you need to know. How to break your tangents. So in the graph editor, you can just drag select that key, press V. Now you can actually separately move one tangent from the other. They're not connected anymore. This is what it looked like previously. So before they were connected, you just press V, free, and now it's free from its friend over there. The other thing that's really important is if you want things in stepped mode or in spline or linear, this is how you do this. So I'm gonna select everything, make sure everything is selected by pressing A, and then I'm gonna press T inside of my graph editor. Now you have access to not only constant, which is stepped, linear, Bezier, which is spline. So stepped, linear, spline. I can make everything into stepped. So it's just those three poses. Let me press T again. You also have access to these. So you can actually make a bounce on a graph that looks like this. So it ends with the squiggly line that slowly fades out. You have access to all these other options which you can experiment with. But just so you know, the hotkey for this is T. Another important thing to know is moving things either globally or locally. You can change that up here. So right now it's global. You can change this, which if you don't know, everything moves to the global axes. So you can actually see X and Y axis. And what you can do is change this to local. And now everything will be moving based on the local controller. So here, for example, if we bring this up and rotate it, you can see the up now is the up facing that controller, not the world. So you can just switch back and forth between global and local, and there's other ones you can experiment with as well. This one is another handy one. You know, when you bend your fingers, for example, all the joints bend at the same time. So when you close your fingers, all the individual joints just rotate at the same time. It's not just one controller just rotating when you select everything, because if you don't set it, this is the default for Blender. So let's do this with the spine here. So I'm gonna go ahead and rotate. You can see it's just the first controller that I selected what's rotating. So you can actually change this by coming here, changing it from median point to individual origins. So individual origins tells it that every single joint needs to be rotated. So when I rotate now, you can see not only this controller gets rotated, the neck gets rotated, and the head gets rotated as well. So it's almost like a splaying effect instead of just one controller. Other things you can do is, of course, I can make sure everything is selected, and I've set keys and everything properly, my cursor, my viewport, there we go. You can actually copy paste keys. So I can go ahead and over here, drag select my key, Control C, and then come over here and Control V. But not only that, you can press Control Shift V to paste the inverse. So this really helps with walk cycles because you could just copy one half of the animation and then Control Shift V it to paste the inverse to the other side. So it saves you a ton of time and you don't need animate and it's built in. So now you can see that we have the inverse of this pose right here. I'm gonna go ahead and delete this. And we talked about animating and how to set up your workspace, but now let's talk about how to actually playblast. So let's go ahead and go to the camera view, press N, and we're gonna go to view. And in view, we're gonna change camera to view. And what this means is that lock camera to our view. So when we change our view, press N to hide this. When you change the view, you can see that you're actually moving the camera. If I zoom out here, you can see the camera is actually moving to match our view. So we can go ahead and match our view here, try and get this little crappy stump, I guess, animation here in the frame. And let me end the animation at frame 20. So, and we have it on our view and we don't want to mess this up. So I'm going to uncheck it now. So now when we move around, it doesn't move the camera around anymore. And this is our animation. Let's say that's what we want to export. So what we can do is go to output and make sure resolution is 1920 by 1080. Scroll down here to where it says output again. And this is where you're telling it you want to output the playblast. So I'm going to go ahead and click the folder, locate where I want to output this, press accept, and we're going to change PNG to FFmpeg video. This is the last option right now. Make sure it's in color, RGB, go to encoding, open that up. Make sure it's H.264, which is usually what you want. And the quality, we can leave it at medium, but you can set the audio to whichever one you want, probably MP3. And with this done, with our location set, now we can actually playblast. So let's go up here in a camera view. I'm gonna go to click these three bars, go to view and viewport, render, animation. And there we go. Here's our beautiful stump animation that we made in 0.5 seconds, all playblasted in the place that we want to export it in. Now, lastly, as a bonus tip, if you made it this far, if you want your scene to be running faster, you want to make sure that simplify is on. So go to render, locate simplify, and turn it on, and then change maximum subdivision on the viewport section to 0. So this is saying that I don't want to see that many subdivisions in the viewport, but when you render, you want to keep it at 6. So when it renders, it's good quality, but when you're working, it's not so good quality. And this helps really speed up your workspace. So in this video, we went from little to no Blender knowledge to setting up your workspace, bringing in a character, learning how to animate it, and how to playblast your shot. Now, to add to that knowledge, what you can do is you can go watch this video right here to animate your very first walk cycle in Blender using the rig that you just downloaded for this video.